Which is the most iconic job in Final Fantasy? I want you to close your eyes and think about it, except if you're driving, then you should keep them open. So what's the picture that comes to mind when you hear the words Final Fantasy and jobs? Well, chances are you thought about a black mage, didn't you? I guess the thumbnail might be responsible for this. But other than that, which are the most memorable jobs in Final Fantasy, and what does it mean for the future of the franchise? Lally-ho to you, fair little Moogle. Today I'd like to discuss the 5 most iconic jobs in Final Fantasy. Introduced as early as the first installment, the job system expanded game after game, and although they do not explicitly appear in every single Final Fantasy game, they symbolically remain. Most probably because every single job has some kind of recurring mechanic enabling us to identify them, aside from their physical appearance or corresponding weapon. Naturally, there's the Black Mage with its distinctive signature look, a pointed hat, some blue robes, and only 2 visible eyes. Vivi in Final Fantasy IX greatly contributed to making it even more famous, but hey, guess what? That was 20 years ago. Now I know that the Black Mage also appeared more recently in a comedy quest in Final Fantasy XIV, but regardless, there were many other games since FF9. So without further ado, let's dive into the 5 most iconic jobs in Final Fantasy. I'll be reviewing their evolution and corresponding game mechanics, how they managed to define or perhaps redefine the RPG genre. Think of it merely as 5 suggestions, and if you want to make your own, just leave a comment below. Number 5. The Dragoon. The Dragoon is one of the most unique jobs in the Final Fantasy universe. They wear some distinctive dragon-like armor and typically wield lances or spears. That's why in Final Fantasy XIV, you have to start as a lancer to become a Dragoon. I know what you're gonna say, hey, they're boring, I fall asleep in dungeons. Okay, sure, but still, what they brought to the saga when they were first introduced as a job in Final Fantasy III was the jump mechanic, and I think that was original. Though the first Dragoon appeared in Final Fantasy II, it was not until the 3rd installment that Dragoon obtained a unique jump ability. In their first appearance, Dragoons were dragon riders, most of whom were killed by the Emperor, save for Rikud. Of course, the most representative of all Dragoons would be Kain Highwind in Final Fantasy IV, but as seen in Final Fantasy XIV is, I believe, a serious contender as well.
No worm! This ends here!
A few games like this chose to expand on the dragon theme, and that's even more remarkable in 11. Having Dragoon as your main job, you can summon a wyvern as your pet. Don't give me that look, George, it'll make me blush. Other characters contributed to keep the job alive beside the dragon imagery, because they can jump or wield a lance or a spear. They're not quite as famous outside the Final Fantasy universe, but still, they are pretty much memorable.
That's a good girl.
Number 4. The Gunbreaker. Now I'm aware that Gunbreaker as a job is not really a staple in Final Fantasy. It's the Gunblade that is iconic. A gun and a sword. What's more Final Fantasy than this? The most recent occurrence of a famous Gunbreaker would be Lightning, and ironically enough, female Gunbreakers in FF14 have an hiding stance similar to Lightning's battle stance. Similarly, the Alezin Gunbreaker in the official render mimics Squall's pose in Dissidia, and Squall is so popular in Eorzea that it's common to meet a player with the name Lionheart, or even a player that dresses exactly like him. So I did the same thing, you know. The Gunbreaker also has many references to Squall from Final Fantasy VIII. His name is Squall, by the way, not Leon. Thanks. A few job abilities were named after Squalls in fact, like Blasting Zone or Wrath Divide, whereas abilities such as No Mercy, Bloodfest or Demon Slice are all references to Cypher. The imagery of the lion is also quite significant. No wonder why you unlock the quest from a Hrothgar, the race responsible for the creation of the discipline, and maybe a nod to Squall's lion motif. Maybe I'm a lion, you know. No, not that. That's a bunny girl. Anyway, Gunbreakers might not be a recurring job within Final Fantasy, the gunblades that they wield clearly sets them apart from other jobs with similar abilities but also more generic weapons. This is why I guess gunblades were added retroactively in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core in particular. You can also find a gunblade among Gilgamesh's legendary weapon collection in Final Fantasy XII, so if Gilgamesh himself can wield it, then it's a classic, and now I can rest my case. Number 3. The Paladin and the Dark Knight. I think the Paladin is yet another icon of the Final Fantasy saga. I mean, that's the job they chose for Endwalker after all, because the Paladin is a sacred knight, or holy knight in Japanese. When you think about Paladins in Final Fantasy, there's a good chance you'll think about Sea Soul Harvey in Final Fantasy IV. Sea Soul is to the Paladin what Squall is to the Gunbreaker, in other words. The single difference being that Sea Soul actually transitions from being a Dark Knight, and probably its best incarnation so far, into a Paladin. Both work in some kind of duality. Paladins usually have access to white magic or spells to support their team, whereas Dark Knights wield more offensive spells inspired by black magic. While the Paladin class does not exist in Final Fantasy XIII, Snow is reputed to be by far the best sentinel in the game, which basically does the same job as what a Paladin does, like covering or provoking enemies. No wonder why the Legacy Sentinel discipline in Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 became attributed to the Paladin in later versions. The Dark Knight, on the other hand, would be represented by Leon in Final Fantasy II, and when the job was officially introduced in Final Fantasy III, the Dark Knight will wield a special sword to prevent some enemies from multiplying. And for those who played 11, you know that killing things is what a Dark Knight does. If the warrior felt too generic to be iconic, Paladins and Dark Knights are memorable for how they combine big swords, heavy armor, high physical power, and a specific imagery making them unique. Number 2. The Summoner. The Summoner archetype is a staple in RPGs. They often come in the form of a Necromancer or Warlock. Summons were introduced in the third installment, and it was already cool to be able to summon powerful deities to help you in combat and make you feel like a powerhouse. But there was no single character to represent the class, although summoners had a village. The first character to really embody the summoner would be Rydia in FF4, and you know Titan will give you hell. In Final Fantasy IV and 9, the summoners were distinct races of people possessing the power of summoning, but like the Dragoons in Final Fantasy II, they were all killed at some point in the story. The most memorable summoner would be Yuna in Final Fantasy X.
I've done it. I have become a summoner.
That's the first thing you can hear her say, and that was quite a memorable enough moment. I tried to do the same when I became a summoner myself in 11, except nobody cared. Well, at least they had a beautiful rainbow in Lethene. Talking about 11, the summoner is able to summon not just deities, but also other stuff, like this beautiful water elemental. I called mine Georgie. What's your problem? Of course there are more recent occurrences of the summoner job. You may think about the magical DPS class in FF14 with its crazy but rewarding rotation of spells, but the most recent occurrences would be no less than Noctis himself in Final Fantasy XV. That being said, it is safe to assume that the next Final Fantasy will have some kind of summoner at some point. Now just a few highlights before we move on to my number 1 pick, beside the Black Mage. The White Mage. The White Mage almost made it in my list, but I thought the function of the job as a healer was more iconic than the job itself. Ares, for instance, is more than just a healer, or so is Rosa, or Garnet, 2 other examples. White mages in general are essential for healing, but curiously they don't come first when you ask players what the most iconic jobs in Final Fantasy are. The Ninja. The Ninja has no special ability to set them apart from the rest, but it's a pick I often came across during my research, probably because of Yuffie. In the first installment, however, the Ninja was an upgrade to the Thief class. They could equip many more weapons and armor than the Thief, and could also cast a few black magic spells. Aside from that, I think they're quite generic, except Shadow. Shadow rules! The Blue Mage. Blue mages have unique abilities, setting them apart from other mages. Whether that be Kistis in FF8 or the more traditional Blue Mage, their ability to use master magic is what makes them shine. For that reason, you could say that Blue Mages have consistently appeared in one way or another between Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy XI, whether that be Gau the Feral Kid, Strago using Law Magic, the enemy skill Materia, the Gun Mage, or Quina. Yes, they're all memorable, but not quite as much as my final pick, in my humble opinion. Number 1. The Red Mage. Now, the Red Mage was the first job I thought about beside the Black Mage. I felt it was nearly as memorable as the Black Mage because they share a lot of common points. Both appeared in the first Final Fantasy and have a specific appearance and gameplay mechanics that are inalienable from their respective jobs, like the other mages we discussed earlier. Their ability to cast both black and white magic is one thing, but they're also known as the jacks of all trades because they're good with swords as well. The most faithful occurrence of Red Mages would be in Final Fantasy XIV, since they have the unique dual cast ability inherited from Final Fantasy V, well except they don't have to earn 999 ability points to get it. Holy Christ. In 11 they are mostly proficient at buffing and debuffing, but they also wield unique spells or abilities like Refresh to restore their MP or Convert to swap the values of their HP and MP around. More to the point, the Red Mage is among the first job classes introduced in the saga, and they have appeared in several installments ever since. Their standard attire often consists of a red cloak and a red hat with a white feather, and even if they are not explicitly present in some titles, they are likely to come up in some other form while retaining their jack-of-all-trades skill set. Nanaki in Final Fantasy VII might not wear a cloak, but his designation alludes to the Red Mage, and although he does not wield any dual cast ability, he has two distinctive feathers around his head. But Nanaki does not need to be a Red Mage for the Red Mage to be iconic, and actually, to be honest, I cannot think of a single character that would impersonate the Red Mage more than any other. Except mine is the best, aren't you, Loda? And yet, they have endured within the saga. I guess that's because they were first conceived as a go-between, or a way to break the rules if you'd like. Now I guess it's your turn to give me your own picks in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, don't forget to leave an impression, a good one if you can, and see you next time for a new exciting episode of Chocobo in Space.
There once was a ship that put to sea, and the name of the ship was the Belly of Tea. The winds blew hard, her bow dipped down, oh blow me bully boys blow. Soon may the Wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go. Soon may the Wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.